So, Anthony, you're talking about the trace fossil called Treptichnus pedum.
Treptichnus pedum, yes. Yes, something I learned about very recently. Apparently it's quite controversial.
It is controversial.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's controversial. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of people who love
bites.
Yeah, science bites.
Welcome to Wonder, brought to you by Geo Co. My name is Holly Cooke. As always, I'm joined by my colleague, Dr Anthony Reid, and we have such a treat for you today. We have Dr Marissa Betts here. Marissa is a geologist, palaeontologist, and senior lecturer at the University of New England. And we really traverse a story of first life in the geological record. And then we walk into a conversation about how earth science informs very powerful perspectives about culture and landscape that we can be bestowing onto future geoscientists. It's a pleasure to be together today.
Thanks very much for inviting me. It's wonderful to be here.
It's really hard to ask Marissa a question and have it not be about the Cambrian. I would love to know, firstly, what is the Cambrian? Anthony and I have dabbled in it a little bit over the course of this show, but what draws you to the Cambrian? What keeps you coming back to that chapter in Earth history?
That's such a great question. Well, firstly, what is the Cambrian? I guess you can kind of come at that question from a few different angles. Technically, it's a period in the geological timescale. The base of the Cambrian is now dated at about 538 million years, although that date is a bit rubbery. It moves around a little bit depending on new data and so on.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that particular boundary in the timescale separates what people call the pre-Cambrian, the Proterozoic and the Archean and beyond, from the Phanerozoic. And the Phanerozoic just means visible life. And in the pre-Cambrian, life was dominated by microbes, very simple life, photosynthesizing. And that boundary between the pre-Cambrian and the Cambrian, they often call the Cambrian explosion of life. And that's when you see in the fossil record a really geologically sudden appearance of lots of different complex animal body plans appearing for the first time. And that's when we talk about visible life. It's those very early animals that evolved during the Cambrian that were the precursors for pretty much everything that happened since.
Fantastic. So first complex animal life in the Cambrian, but also life in the pre-Cambrian. Strange. So these microbial mats that you and I joked about earlier, those would be our pre-Cambrian story, right?
Pre-Cambrian. So, and what was the number you said? How many millions of years ago?
538 is the new date.
But rubbery.
Yeah.
What do you mean rubbery?
Well, when I first started working on the Cambrian, the date was 542, and that was sort of, the taken date. And then a few years later, I went to a conference and someone said that they had a new date from the base of the Cambrian from, I think it's Namibia, and it was 538. And I remember being very convinced by that at that conference. And I was like, oh, maybe it's changed, And sure enough, in one of the new versions or the new iterations of the global timescale, it had changed to 538. So the geological timescale isn't a static chart, and that's something that a lot of people maybe don't understand about geological time, is that it's a human construct. It's like the way that we think about geological time. It's putting things in boxes and so on, which is a very human thing to do. But that particular chart will change all the time depending on new data. We have new methods, that give us new data and new ways to understand how old rocks are. So, of course, it's going to have to be updated all the time.
What a concept. So we dived into deep time and trying to place ourselves in more than just the moment, but it's a fantastic reminder that actually the way that we divide up the chapters of the story of the Earth is actually kind of flexible, and it changes as our methods advances and different markers in the geological record. And I just thought it must be so bizarre for a listener to hear new dates for the Cambrian in Namibia. Could you expand on that? What does it actually, how do you date the Cambrian? Like, what are you using? What have you found in Namibian rocks, or what did they find in Namibian rocks that changed our minds?
So in the Namibian succession, I think they got a new volcanic ash, and they were able to date that quite precisely.
So an ancient volcano erupted and flooded an area
Yeah.
which had, but how do you know it's Cambrian?
Yeah, well, that's the really good point.
So yes, you can date an ash. The volcano ash
Which is
floods
pretty
out
thick,
into
by the way. Yeah, an ancient volcano erupted one time over 500 million years ago, and little Homo sapiens come along, date it, and go, "That's the Cambrian."
Yeah, that's right.
But there's volcanoes are going up all the time.
Mm-hmm.
What makes that volcano or that volcanic ash Cambrian and not Cambrian?
So in building the geological timescale, you need to combine a whole bunch of different kinds of data sets, and dates from volcanic ashes are only one of them, and they call that absolute dating or radiometric dating, and it gives us that really hard number on that particular eruption. You know, you can date it to like a Tuesday afternoon almost. Like that, you would probably say that the techniques these days they're obviously not that accurate or reliable or precise or whatever, but they're getting so much better.
Oh, now it's amazing.
That's right. The error bars are so they can shrink down to the point where it doesn't even matter anymore. And so that's one thing. That's the absolute dating, but we also have relative dating. And that's when you just use different kinds of data to put things in order without necessarily putting a date on anything. And the way that we do that primarily, not just in the Cambrian, but for the whole of the Phanerozoic really, is to use fossils. And so there's a whole suite of different kinds of fossils that tell us that these rocks are Cambrian.
Including something which is a bit controversial, some sort of thing which is not really a fossil, but just the imprint of a
You're going straight for the
fossil.
jugular, Anthony.
That's right. So I actually don't know about the relationship between that date in Namibia and this trace fossil. So, Anthony, you're talking about the trace fossil called Treptichnus pedum.
Treptichnus pedum, yes. Yes, something I learned about very recently. Apparently it's quite controversial.
It is controversial. Yeah. Well, I think it's controversial. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of people who love
bites.
Yeah, bites. Well, we published a paper last year that really kind of threw down the gauntlet and decided that we were going to have a science fight over this. But, to define or ratify boundaries in the geological timescale, we need to define it somehow, right? And in younger rocks, you have a lot of different kinds of opportunities to use different sorts of fossils. In like very recent rocks from the Miocene, for example, you can have a whole bunch of different kinds of plankton, spores, and everything. And you can really be quite precise with these kinds of assemblages because you have so much to work with. In the Cambrian, because life was really kind of just getting started, I guess you can imagine, there's quite a lot of simple things just sort of kicking around for the first time.
It's best to get started.
It's trying its best. It just means that we have a little bit less to work with, I guess, in terms of these proxies for time. And so there is a particular trace fossil called Treptichnus pedum, which has a very distinctive shape. A trace fossil is actually it's not the body of the animal, it's just the trace left behind of the activities that it was doing. And this was probably some kind of worm-like organism.
So it was sort of squidging its way through the mud or something?
Yes,
yeah.
Through some kind of soft substrate. And it was probably mining the substrate for nutrients or something like that. So trace fossils are very interesting on their own, and they can tell you all sorts of interesting things about body plans and the activities of organisms, but they can be difficult to work with in a stratigraphic sense because they can be quite facies specific. So facies is like the substrate. They just like a particular area rather than another.
Yeah. So worms might only exist in a certain like a few 100-meter belt off the coast or something with the nice mud, right? And they're not going to be up on the beach and they're not going to be out in the deep or something like that.
They can be a bit
really
fussy.
limited.
Yeah. They can be a bit fussy.
We've marked like quite a significant boundary in time with something that's fussy in the record.
Yes,
so
that's right.
We need something that's more universal, that will go everywhere and be deposited in rocks all over the place.
Yeah. So T-pedum can help sometimes. I can give you an idea that you're close to the base of the Cambrian. So I wouldn't argue with that. But if you're in carbonate rocks or limestones, T-pedum didn't really quite like living in that kind of environment.
Oozy, muddy, kind of calcareous.
Yeah, calcareous muds weren't really, not a fan.
Not their thing.
Too basic.
Yeah. So if you're working in those kinds of deposits, you're going to have a hard time defining the base of the Cambrian. So you need to use we would argue that you need to use some other proxies.
Science fights. Fantastic.
Get into it.
And just to be clear, like dating the Cambrian is it's awesome because the Cambrian, as you said in the beginning, is this remarkable chapter in Earth history.
Yeah.
It was this burst of complex life, and it's important that we have a gauge on those dates. But science is all at the frontier. It's in disproving hypothesis. There's disagreements is sort of the spice of life in science.
So was the Cambrian really an explosion? Like how, that's such a kind of a useful kind of metaphor, but
if we take the fun out of it, was it really an explosion?
Just give you some facts here.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's still something that people are kind of arguing about. So I guess the technical term would be radiation instead of, if we didn't want to say, Cambrian explosion, because that's a little bit kind of hyperbolic, I suppose, but we would say Cambrian radiation.
So radiation of what?
Of complex animal life. Okay.
So body forms or different ways of eating.
And particularly bilaterians.
Ooh,
okay, so we're bilaterians. We're bilaterally symmetrical.
Bilateral.
Yes, that's right.
Right.
So prior to that, we had the Ediacaran fauna. And South Australians know all about the Ediacaran
Claim to
fauna.
fame.
Some South Australians.
Yeah. There's a famous fossil site in the Flinders Ranges at a place called Nilpena.
Beautiful.
And that preserves some absolutely remarkable fossils.
But they're kind of boring?
Well, that depends.
Controversial opinion.
Science
fight. Boring when you compare it to the radiation of complexity.
Well, they're difficult to compare. They're very difficult to compare. They're preserved in very different ways. They have very different body plans. Whether they're actually related to real animals, capital A, it's difficult to know. Some people say they are, some people say they aren't. Some people say some are and some aren't. There's geochemical evidence to say that they are related.
So there was continuity between the Ediacaran type animal
there is a little bit.
And the Cambrian?
There is a little bit. And in the Uratana Formation, actually, in the Flinders Ranges, which is a Cambrian deposit, there has been some Ediacaran-style fronds recovered from that. So, and there are a few places around the world where you sort of see a little bit of the Ediacaran transitioning kind of into the Cambrian, but they don't last for very long. And that certainly doesn't mean that the Cambrian explosion or the radiation doesn't exist. So there is kind of a school of thought where people say, oh, actually, it's more the Ediacaran. Like the Ediacaran's where it happened and it just kind of smeared through that boundary and it's all part of one big event. But I guess
how many millions of years are you talking about that kind of event happening?
Well, I guess the base of the Cambrian, if we say 538, and it depends on who you ask about, like the length of the Cambrian explosion and when that happened. So my friend and colleague, Professor John Patterson at UNE, put a paper out a few years ago where he looked at trilobites in the early Cambrian. So they're lovely little, they're like sea cockroaches.
Lovely.
They're pretty cute though.
They have like little buggy eyes, right? Their eyes are really kind of these buggy. And they're on the top of the head.
Yeah, some of them are blind. Like they're really remarkable. And so in the Cambrian they go crazy in terms of the radiation, right? So you can use them to as a kind of clock, I suppose, to gauge
trilobite evolution as the clock.
Yeah, that's right, because they have a hard skeleton, and that means that they preserve in the rock record very well, and so they have more of a reliable record that you can use in this sort of a way. And they suggested that based on the trilobite dates, or the trilobite occurrences, that the Cambrian explosion or the radiation was happening very early and very quickly in the base of the Cambrian. And it was kind of over by 521 or something like that.
Okay.
And so, and from about there, things really slowed down and became almost normal rates of evolution after that. But that's, based on their data from their trilobite record.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's plenty more that we can find out from the record.
Fantastic. So
about 17 million years or?
Blink of an eye.
17 million years. Is that a blink of an eye in...
We're lucky if we get 80 years of life. I'm
just saying, I know what you mean, and I like things that happen quickly. I get it, right? But is 17 million years really rapid? Like, think of all the things that could happen in 17 million years.
Is that rapid? Obviously, yeah.
This is actually our philosophy podcast.
That's actually a dumb thing to say, isn't it?
So this is
a lot can happen, right? But
we're using fossils to. Yeah. So we're using the imprints of life in the rock record to tell us about timing. But you gave a cracking lecture last night, and I've never seen so much excitement about what we called small shelly fossils. I was going to go smelly shell fossils, but small shelly fossils. I want you to give your plug on why these kinds of fossils, on the microscopic scale, are actually cooler or as cool as these big imprints of sea cockroaches that we see in Cambrian rocks. Give me your plug.
So I didn't know anything about small shelly fossils until I started doing some work for my supervisor at Macquarie University, Glenn Brock. So, and Glenn was a small shelly fossil man, like Cambrian small shelly fossil guy, right?
When you say small, how small are you talking?
So small, they're definitely millimetric. Some would be I reckon the whoppers would be the size of your pinky fingernail. That's a monster. Yeah. But some can be extraordinarily small, a few microns.
Far out.
Yeah.
That is absolutely microscopic. How do you go looking for them? How do you know where they are?
So again, we normally target the carbonate rocks. And that means that we can put the carbonate rocks or the limestones in a weak acid and very slowly digest the acid away, and it leaves the fossils behind. The caveat to that is that hopefully they're not also made from calcium.
I was about to say, you just dissolve all your fossils.
That is a collector bias.
Yeah, for sure. That's right.
So things like trilobites, they made their skeleton out of calcite. Mollusks, calcium carbonate as well.
Yeah.
Aragonite.
Right.
And various other things. So if you need to get those particular ones preserved in a special way, either most commonly it would be phosphatization, so they're replaced by phosphate, or they're filled in by phosphate and they turn into a little mold, or more rarely, I guess, is silicification, so they're replaced by silica. And so they'll just pop out of the acid and you can pick them out with a paintbrush and a microscope.
So to anyone listening, that is actually kind of how science works, paintbrush and a microscope.
Oh, mate, the paintbrushes that I use, I have 2 or 3 hairs on them. And
what, from overuse, or
they just need really small, yes. And I realised that.
This is a hangover from your visual arts days.
Yeah, actually, I was like, I need one of those really, really tiny paintbrushes. And the best place to buy the really tiny paintbrushes is those the shops where you go and buy the figurines that people paint, like the Warhammer,
awesome
tabletop
Star Wars figurine painting, and
and they have the perfect tiny little paintbrushes for picking small shelly fossils. It's really funny.
Yeah, awesome.
Although there's another group of fossils that I work on. I haven't worked on them so much, but I have picked they're small carbonaceous fossils, and instead of the shells, they're like a soft tegument. They're the original unmineralized cuticle of some of these very early animals. And to pick them, you pick them wet in a petri dish with distilled water after you've dissolved the rock, and you pick it with a brush that's actually just got one human eyelash.
Oh my God.
The poor undergrad student, come here.
No, I was picking the factory picking out the eyelashes. How do you collect human eyelashes?
I don't know. You buy these brushes. I don't know where they come from.
The ethics of
Actually, I never thought about that. That's
that's right.
Maybe you can make your
own. Fast forward. Anyway, so can I just... Sorry, my brain's pinging here because I think I just heard you say unmineralized. Mm-hmm. So does that mean... oh my goodness, let's see if I'm going to get this right. So typically when we look at fossils these days, it's kind of rare or uncommon that they might actually be the literal same, unchanged, as in chemistry and the environment hasn't interacted with the imprint or that fossil in a way that changes it. Did you just say unmineralized? So it's like the same thing?
Yeah, they probably are. They're a bit cooked, I would say, because they come out a bit amber coloured.
Mhm.
So they have been changed a little bit, but they haven't been, they're not mineralized, and they're still soft and kind of rubbery looking when they come out of the acid
Fantastic.
baths. Yeah, it's quite strange. I haven't had, like, to be honest, not great success myself with that particular technique. It's a real hit and miss thing, and you use a very dangerous acid called hydrofluoric acid.
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's
Ooh,
This is the fun stuff.
Yeah.
Beware of that one, kids.
Yeah, that's not a fun acid.
Yeah.
But the people who have had great success have found some of the most remarkable
bet.
Cambrian fossils, including like very tiny mouth parts from
Wow.
crustacean-like organisms,
Wow.
or like, and they're, you know, the sort of things that we would never get from the shelly fossil
Yeah.
record.
The mouths of first complex life that we know to exist in the universe. There's someone out there studying that fossil. That's brilliant.
Astonishing.
I just heard you drop the word amber, and I reckon that is going to be a brilliant segue to ask you about, when we were chatting earlier, I get the vibes that you like movies and you like films, and you sort of connect to them in a way that's more than just sort of eating your popcorn and Maltesers on the couch going, that's a good movie, but like they communicate powerful messages. How do you feel about films and science? And I hope you know the film I'm trying to get you to talk about with the
Yeah.
amber.
I do love your amber segue, and I assume you're talking about the mosquitoes in amber from Jurassic Park.
Brilliant.
Yeah, 100%. So I do dabble with the Cinema for SciComm in Armidale, where UNE is based. I run a science film night ostensibly once a month called SciFlix.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, it was born from chatting with John Patterson, actually, I think in my office. We were talking about, we should watch Jurassic Park because it's really funny. And it's like, it is one of my favorite films. It's a wonderful film. It's like a classic Steven Spielberg. It was before they had like crazy CGI. So it was like genuine, proper, like good puppets. You know,
Puppets, exactly.
Yeah, they were great. They did talk to paleontologists about how to put these animals together. Yeah, they got stuff wrong.
Oh, that's okay.
yeah,
it's a
who cares?
film. It's how it makes you feel.
That's right.
It matters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, you know, we thought that Jurassic Park would be a great one to kick off with. One, because we have a whole bunch of vertebrate paleontologists that study dinosaurs at UNE. And so I thought what we could do is that we could pair a film that people love. So you kind of bait people down to the cinema to come and watch the film. And then you also pair that with a talk from a researcher who researches a relevant topic. So we had Dr. Phil Bell, one of our vertebrate paleos.
Yeah.
And he spoke before the film, and then we do a Q&A with the audience after the film.
And you know what? That's great because people love to pick apart movies. Like we love, and what you said in your lecture last night, it hit home because like people love to hate a bad movie. And like the chatter about movies, like even Oppenheimer and Barbie, we're living in a cultural moment in cinema there. But people love to chat about films. And so if you actually pop a scientist in the room, that just adds, it's the best cultural education blend ever.
Yeah, it works really well, even if the film's bad. Like we did.
Especially if it's bad in a way.
Oh, yeah. And we've done all sorts. Like we've done wonderful documentaries that are really good and, you know, you make you really think deeply about stuff. And then we've done like The Meg. And I mean, I don't want to say bad things about The Meg, but like it's, you know, it is what it is. And someone suggested maybe we do The Meg 2, but then a friend of mine went and saw it and he was like, it's actually terrible. So maybe we just
It's even worse.
It's going to be hard to make this one funny, guys.
Yeah.
We did that already. Let's just leaving dogs lie.
We had Dr. Nick Campione speak with The Meg, and he has worked on fossil sharks and so on. And so it was really good, you know, and it is funny to laugh at terrible films. Like it's wonderful. It's a wonderful bonding experience. It gives people that sense of like community, like you were there together and you watched that like terrible film together.
Totally.
And had huge laughs about it. So yeah, it's worked really well.
Great. And it just allows that point to be honed in, which is, you know, I think I said something a bit silly in a previous episode, which was, who cares about data? It's all about how it makes you feel. It's all about its social, cultural, emotional context. And I mean, you don't want to say that too loud while I'm messing up my lab work in the university. It's all about how I
there's
feel.
a time and a place.
Exactly. But it's kind of true, which is science when it's put in the context of people and how it informs how we live our lives, how we connect to each other, our past and our futures. That's that's where science thrives. It's not just in the data space or in the lab space. It's actually in the human connection of the science.
I agree completely. And I think that's what films do perfectly.
Mhm.
And it's what films do better, I think, than just a scientist getting up and trying to do some psychom and explaining the research, right? Like that films almost have a scientific way of hitting you in the feels, you know, and getting you emotional about something. And I think that emotions motivate people way more than facts.
Absolutely.
And so if you really want to make an impact on people in terms of understanding science and caring about science and then being motivated to do something with that scientific information, then you need to make them feel something. And that's the most important thing.
Even the name science can turn people off, really.
Yeah, it can sometimes.
So because it's just a way of understanding the world.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, it's called science, but
that's right. And I don't know, I kind of, with sci-flix, I kind of co-opted the sci-fi kind of name. And originally I was kind of going for mostly science fiction sort of films. And I do really love science fiction. But yeah, so I just kind of thought that, we'll just do whatever people wanted to watch, you know. And I thought, actually, I'd sent like an email around to the university and I was like, are there people here who, or researchers who have a film, like, or know of a film that really like speaks about their particular work that they would like to speak with at the cinema? And I got heaps of people coming back, and we got one of my favorite ones was The Martian. Have you guys seen The Martian?
No, I've not.
Yeah.
Oh, it's bloody wonderful.
Yeah.
And we had two soil scientists come and speak with that. And because the Martian's about that the poor astronaut who gets stranded on Mars and he has to survive by growing potatoes.
It's like I'm either thinking about the Irish famine or the Martian. I can't remember which one.
Potatoes is the connection there.
But they, you know, the soil scientist guys love that, you know, and Chris Guppy, one of the speakers, he said that it was his favourite film ever. He'd watched it 26 times. He'd done all the maths.
I believe that.
Yeah. He'd done all the maths about
worked it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And he couldn't wait to tell everybody about the science in the film at the cinema.
That's
It was
so cute.
Yeah, it was great.
That's awesome. Now now here's an absolutely shameless plug for you, Marissa. For our listeners here, Marissa has just produced, with the help of Mike Terry, the filmmaker, the most powerful natural science film orientated in human connection to the landscape. I don't think I've ever watched something that's made me feel so mushy on the inside. You've watched it too recently, Anthony.
I've watched it several times. Yeah,
and
I go back to it actually.
It's one of those things that, you know, it's kind of rare in life when you encounter people, or especially media in the 21st century, that stops you dead in your tracks and makes you really interrogate how you feel about your perspective, how you feel about the world around you, how you feel about the people around you. And I'm sorry to put you right in the limelight, but you did that with Roller. Can you talk to us about Roller?
Of course, yeah. Thank you for all the kind words about Roller. And people still come up to me and say things like that, and I am continually astonished by the impact that it has had on people. And for that, I'm extraordinarily proud. It is one of the projects in my life that I'm most proud of being involved with.
No doubt.
And I had no idea it would end up like that when I first sort of pitched the idea to Mike. And I mean, the reason why it's so powerful, I think, is because of the contributions of Anawan elders Les and Steve Ahoy.
100%.
Yes.
100%. You could have done that same movie and we all would have gone, oh, that's interesting,
that's cool.
geology.
Yeah.
I like basalts and you know, that sort of stuff. But that conversation, and there's several points in the movie which really stick out to me. And one of them is the story of the big brother and the little brother. And it just boggles my mind that geologically, Big Brother is older than Little Brother, these two hills around Armidale.
Yeah.
It's great.
And nobody really understood that until we made the film. So,
wow. So you just talked about, hey, and how did you kind of collaborate in that way? What was the kind of connection you had?
Well, I know I started to talk to the anthropologists in our building, and they said, get in touch with Steve. And Steve is the cultural objects expert in in the community and at the university. And so I got in touch with him and I went for a few chats like at his office and he showed me. And originally my idea was to use stone tools as a vehicle to tell a geological story about the Tablelands area or Eastern Australia, because the stone tools are made out of different materials for different purposes, and they have their own stories, be that cultural or geological or whatever. And I think that that's absolutely amazing. And so he whipped out a whole bunch of these amazing objects and showed me all of them and told me stories about them. And I started writing all of this stuff down. And so I was coming up with sort of a story I imagined in my mind about how we could tell these sort of parallel sort of cultural and geological stories through the tools. And then he's like, oh, do you want to talk to Les? And Les is the oldest initiated knowledge holder in the Anawan community. And I was like, well, it sounds like an important guy to talk to. So, yeah, I'll talk to Les.
Pretty fortunate to have a connection to be able to talk with him. Yeah,
absolutely. And so I think Les was visiting up from the coast and one day. And so we had a chat. And I think we spoke for an hour or more. I was just, furiously making notes, and he was telling me all these amazing stories and a lot of information. I was asking questions, and I think, I don't know, in that kind of conversation, I think he sort of felt like, oh, this sounds like a good idea to be involved with. And he said there are 3 dreaming stories that we can tell that haven't been recorded before, and we could do it for this project.
Amazing.
And I was like, well, I feel pretty touched by that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, very humbled.
In every way possible.
Yeah.
I mean, and thank you, for the rest of us as well for sharing that, it's amazing.
And I immediately threw out my stone tool story because I was like, well, I mean, the stone tools are amazing and they're still part of the film, but those dreaming stories really became the 3 important chapters that we talk about in the film. Yeah.
Yep. Something, because we talk about we feel deeply connected to the landscape, and I've just never seen it done so articulately before, to say that the two ways, well, not just two, there are many ways to understand the world, but they're not in competition. We perceive the natural world around us emotionally and culturally, and there's old learnings that we can put into modern science, and it's just remarkable that how well you go through the different ways of understanding the landscape. And the geology takes us to the awesome earth origins of the stone tools, for example, but there is an entire world in understanding the human history behind how we manipulate that geology and have survived for generations on the land.
Roller, I mean, with that particular balance that you're talking about, like the geoscientific side and the cultural knowledge, right? Like, it was very important, I think, that, it wasn't about trying to use one to qualify the other. No. That's not really how it works.
You don't compare them.
No,
it's okay.
That's right. I think it was fortuitous and very fun to realise that Big Brother and Little Brother are really older and younger. That's amazing. And Les, when he found that out, absolutely just loved that.
Yeah.
Yeah. He couldn't believe it.
It was like, oh.
Yeah. And when I realised that, I remember being in bed one night, we were we were midway through filming, and then I worked out what Big and Little Brother were, because Little Brother was a bit of a mystery to me. I didn't know exactly which plug it was.
Oh, yeah.
And then I was like, oh man,
that is actually
gonna be great. It's a Little Brother.
It really is little.
Yeah, that's right.
So the Little Brother was 19 million years old or something like that.
Yeah,
and Big Brother was a 250
50 million year old granite. Yeah. And they're completely different styles. Yeah, that's right. And they've done different things. So the balance as well, we wanted to make sure that it celebrated the First Nations stories primarily. And it just made sense that way because of the weight of those dreaming stories and how special they were, especially being recorded for the first time and told by Les himself. So I think that it just made sense better that way.
Did you have a particular motivation for pursuing that kind of theme in your film.
Yeah, so a few years prior to that, I remember reading in the news about the Juukan Caves disaster in Western Australia perpetrated by Rio Tinto. So probably everybody's heard about that by now. It was really all over the news. And but that was where Rio Tinto knowingly blew up a sacred site in order to access higher grade iron ore.
45,000-year-old site.
Yes, yeah, that's right. And they knew it was there and did it anyway. And I think that became pretty obvious in the investigations that kind of ensued afterwards. And I think collectively, Australia knows that that's it's a deep, deep tragedy. And it's one of those things that you read about in the news sometimes and you feel really helpless, deeply angry. After a while, I sort of thought, well, maybe I'm not that helpless. I am an earth science educator. Like I do have students that I teach first year geology. I try and get people excited about geoscience so they continue on to second and third year and hopefully beyond, But I think that it's my responsibility to impart important values on people that they will take with them into their careers, especially if it's in industry, but anywhere, research, teaching, whatever.
I think that's the ultimate power of geoscience. It's like we're coming up to a reckoning in geology, which is our deep and thorough scientific understanding of the earth means that we use the earth for a lot of natural resources. It means we've become very, very good at learning how to use the earth, and for the most part, to build our modern society. Like these aren't black and white. The caves is a black and white conversation, but it's not necessarily a black and white conversation about how we tread lightly on the earth while using natural resources to essentially build our modern society. But the geoscientist plays an exceptional role in that, because it's like we are stewards of this knowledge of the land and stewards of the earth, and we go into industries whose business it is to source and extract natural resources. And so I think what you're saying about, bestowing this sort of value set and this earth science perspective, like the gravity of what it means to understand the earth and appreciate the earth for its beauty, not just its resources. Like that's a real shift. That's a real cultural shift change in how earth scientists should go out into the world.
Thank you for saying all of that, because those are the kinds of things that I've hoped really have come through with Roller. And so it's really nice to hear those things kind of said back.
Absolutely.
Sometimes when you put things out into the world and you just hope people understand what you're trying to say.
Totally.
So it is really, really nice to hear people say that. And that is the point, right? Yeah. We know now that we're going into like a new age, I suppose. The sort of we're looking for minerals and elements that are going to help us create a sustainable future, right? We're trying to move away, very rightly, from fossil fuels, from fracking and all of those things that have terrible PR and so on, and actually are awful for the environment. But we're going to still need mining. We're going to still need mining to create all of those sustainable technologies. And it's my future students' responsibility to navigate that balance between having to do that, to extract, to find, extract and process all of that material, just like you said, but to tread as lightly on the earth as possible and maintain good relationships with people. That's going to be really hard.
Oh, I've got goosebumps. It's a really complex conversation to have, especially with young people. And I don't mean young people as in like young, like sort of, the 25s and under that I sort of surround myself with. It's complicated because, like we said, emotion is the motor that drives us along and gives us purpose. And there is so much emotion in respecting and understanding how First Nations have interacted with the landscape for over looking at 65,000 years, but also understanding that our modern society needs us to use the earth more and more. And it can make me feel slightly nauseated to try and hold that balance. So films like Roller, which is just 30 minutes out of your day to understand that there are many ways you can interpret, appreciate the landscape, and taking that perspective and putting it, into the minds of young earth scientists is just about the most powerful thing you can do, is just share that perspective.
The film is freely available on YouTube, so you can Google
and it's got a website?
Stone. Yeah, rollerstone.com, ROLA stone.com. That's the website where you can actually watch the full dreaming stories they're unedited. Of course, we had to edit them to fit into the time frame for the film. But if you wanted to watch Les talk without being kind of edited or chopped up, then you can watch those 3 dreaming stories there. And then there's also a link to the film that you can watch.
I can't emphasize how much I love conversations like this. So having you here and chatting it's just made the second half of my year, to be totally honest, to go from understanding how we put, dates into the chapters of Earth history to then how we take the geological, perspective and sort of and frame a new way of thinking about how we tread on this planet. Like this is it for me. So Marissa, this has been fantastic. Anthony, awesome to have you on as always.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Holly. Thanks, Marissa.
Thank you both so much for having me. It's been absolutely wonderful.